Travis Wayne Goodsell. If you are unaware of modern church history, there's always been a whole number of different protesters of the church, and they're not all Christian. There's a lot of ex-Mormons, and a lot of those were excommunicated because they stood up to the church and protested something. Like ordained women. She was Mormon when the church shut her down by excommunicating her. She still runs the organization, but their power has been diminished. And it's now an underground movement, per se. But she has been successful in getting the church to make changes towards their treatment of women. Likewise, you have a bishop who protested bishops' interviews of children, saying that bishops are getting too sexual in their interview questions. And the church excommunicated him. Because that's what you do when somebody protests. You excommunicate them, rather than saying, you know what, let's fix this, so it's not an issue or a problem. I think excommunication fixes things, I guess. But that too becomes an issue now as well. Church is too excommunication happy. When Mormons have serious concerns, church just excommunicates them. Screw you and your concerns, excommunicated. But that bishop was able to go on to form Protect LDS Children movement and got the church to change, so that there were a standardized test question or interview questions very similar to the adults version, except they threw in some extra stuff for kids, which I'm not happy about those. Nonetheless, that's all they had to do. They didn't need to excommunicate the guy, and they just had to say, oh, we don't have standardized interview questions for children? Oh, well, we can fix that. Nope, excommunicated. So we've seen this pattern, that the church constantly keeps caving in when a big enough pressure is exerted on them. A big enough group pressures them. But there's a problem here, because the church are responding to each of the numerous protests individually. There's not one big one to knock them down. And I think we're at that point now where there's enough holes in the LDS church dam that we can stop trying to get the church to patch up one hole at a time, as that hole keeps re-exposing itself with each new conference. For example, for this conference, expect to hear Oaks be a bigot, racist, sexist, or hate the poor, or some other form of hate that he will have to be reminded yet again to be sensitive, to plug up that hole that he unpeeled. That's expected. That's what Oaks does. He just doesn't care, just says what's on his mind. He's been a judge, so screw all of us. He gets to say whatever he wants, because he's a religion. He has religious freedom. But enough pressure gets put on, and then, oh, okay, We'll have representatives come talk to you, not to me. And they'll put off a cover of sensitivity for you. Does that make you happy? And then the next conference comes and I'll be back at it again. So why does the church cave to peer pressure, at least temporarily, each and every single time? You know, why? I mean, yes, they use it to their advantage to throw in a kick in the crotch of the people protesting. Similar to ordained women, the church changed the temple text, the ordinances in the temple text as well. But it was a setup. They distracted women with an added role, speaking role for Eve, which was just from selections from the Book of Moses. I don't know if anybody caught that. But then no longer required the veil for women, and no longer required women to obey their husbands. Oh, hilarious. So yes, women, you are free to leave the kitchen. Of course, then we're going to have to figure out how to feed the kids. Pizza again. Or we can remember the... Yeah, we won't do that. But what Mormon women missed is that he changed the law of chastity also. And that subtle change in wording everyone missed because they were distracted with women no longer obeying their husband. See, he threw in those to whom you are legally and lawfully wedded according to his law, which is section 132, because Brigham had replaced the chapter on monogamy and section 131 and put 132 in its place and to emphasize 10 virgins now. And so, yeah, the church really doesn't fully change, they just appear to change. And thus the holes in the dam keep reappearing. And why then does the church cave to peer pressure? And it goes back into history. Because the Brighamite Church is now a secret that even historians are not fully aware of. But Brigham's organization, and he established Articles of Incorporation in 1852. It involved polygamy, yeah. It also involved death to America in the temple. They used Joseph's assassination to justify threats to America. They also had tobacco fields and a brewery, thus the barley and hops, whatever is needed for the brewery to make beer. Now, what would they use tobacco and beer for? Brothels, prostitution. Yeah, they weren't just practicing polygamy, they were also practicing prostitution. Because that's what you do in the Wild West. Orrin Porter Rockwell got the first one, they only tell us that it's a hotel. That's what they were. Similar to our hotels today. So how long are you going to be staying? Just an hour. I only have money for an hour. I see you're with a new wife this time. Yep, new wife. That's what she is. Yep, yep, for an hour. And so, yeah, it really was debauchery in Brigham Young's religion. They were not high and holy, not by any means. And there's other stuff as well, like the Mountain Meadows Massacre. So when the United States kept hearing about all the problems with the Mormon Church, as Brigham was dethroned as governor when the Mexico Territory, Deseret Kingdom, became Utah Territory, the government allowed Brigham to be the first governor, and he, replace him, and thus they did. But then the Mormon Church kept chasing out of town governor after governor, justice after justice. They didn't want outsiders in their kingdom. They're not happy that their kingdom was dethroned, that Brigham Young was dethroned as king and then dethroned as governor. And so, yeah, the church really was evil. They were not conforming and compliant to the laws of the land, as Article of Faith number 12 says we are. And so the United States sent in the army, and that's why the Salt Lake Temple was delayed 40 years. But the church kept resisting, and so the United States in Congress came out with the Edmunds-Tucker Act. And even though most people say it's targeting polygamy, it was targeting also the criminal activity behind it. So Brigham Young, in taking wives before leaving on the journey and marrying off women to others of his 12, and then leaving the country to Mexico Territory, he was committing sex trafficking. Sex slave trafficking. Women did not have the freedoms and luxuries that we've sort of given them from the civil rights movement. Women were property. They were not considered human. They were not considered capable of taking care of themselves. And if you do not understand that in our early American history, dear God, the alternate reality you must have created for yourself. And so, Brigham Young was a horrible, evil man. And the United States of America, using the Edmunds-Tucker Act, disincorporated the Church of Brigham. Shut it down completely. They were allowed to still be Mormon. They could meet for meetings that were religious. Just no more brewery, no more tobacco plantation, no more brothels, no more Brigham Young University. That became the University of Utah, etc., etc. And so the church, in order to get buildings back, they had to go into debt by renting them. And so they had to pick and choose what they needed to rent versus what they wanted, which is the brothels, of course, right? Yeah. And so the United States eventually suppressed the church sufficiently because they kept resisting with polygamy. They had to have the Reed-Smoot hearings in Congress as the church was still practicing it, even though the church was denying, no, we're not. Oh, those are rogue Mormons. Yeah, well, the captain goes down with the ship. You're supposed to inform the Mormons that you're no longer practicing it, and you need to enforce it among the Mormons. So eventually the church did stop. This destroyed the church, put them deep into debt. If it hadn't have been for Lorenzo Snow and his Windows of Heaven revelation down in St. George, giving a little meeting down there, where all of a sudden in the middle of the meeting, I'm getting revelation from our God, the inverted pentagram symbol. We're now going to do a protection racket. You're going to give your tithing to the church to pay off our debts in renting back our property that was confiscated because of our crime and corruption. Nothing says we've repented like continuing with new and innovative crimes. But the United States let the church get away with this one. And so decades pass, 1923 comes along. And the church is allowed to reincorporate. And Mormons are no longer members. We're now chattel. We're being used by the church to make money, just like customers for a store. We got to pay our protection dues. Fire insurance, as it's known in the church, where we gamble with our money into the church with no guarantee of a return on our investment. You know, like when a rainy day comes along, like a viral pandemic, church has no interest in helping out. And then advocate the spreading and escalation of it to cause death and sickness among the Mormons. This is why the church always caves to a big enough peer pressure, or at least pretends to cave. They take it a step and say, does that fix it? Can you leave us alone now? And unfortunately, too many people say, yeah, we're fine now. You should have checked the fine print before saying, fine, that's good enough. We're happy. Because the church is still screwing up little kids for protect the LDS children movement. And of course, I just exposed how the church is still screwing over women with planning for polygamy, etc., etc., etc. I don't know how many times the Jews had to keep coming back to the church saying, stop baptizing our Holocaust victims. You know, I hope the church has finally fixed that. But nope. Taking away agency, that's the name of the church's game. And so what is needed is not to have all the various groups continue peer pressuring the church to change, because they don't. What is needed is for one big peer pressure to shut down altogether. They just refuse to be good. They're using religion as a front for criminal activity. They're involved in international terrorism, financial crimes. And so we get distracted when we hear about Mark Hoffman's case and how the church tried to cover it up by paying him off for the documents. That the church actually knew that the Book of Mormon was written by Sidney Rigdon the whole time. They just lied and deceived. So no, there's more serious stuff going on than just lying about church history. There's severe insurrection crimes, RICO Act violations that the church is involved with. And so we can't just keep pressuring on all different fronts. We need one big push now. Saying enough is enough. We need to demand our government, our justice system, shut them down again. It's the only way to stop them. We need to tear down the dam, and if Mormons or ex-Mormons want, rebuild a better one. That's not criminal. That's not corrupt. That doesn't have Lucifer as their sacred secret god carved on the Salt Lake Temple as the keystone of Mormonism.